Well, this started off as a joke, actually. In 2014, we were presenting at the British Fascia Symposium, and everyone there was just sticking the word fascia onto other things. It was kind of crazy. So people weren't doing muscle work, they were doing myofascia. People weren't doing nervous work, they were doing neurofascia. Everything was fascia this, fascia that. And because we were we were looking at people's upright posture and how gravity affects it, as a joke, we started saying, "Oh, we deal with geofascia." Just silly thing. However, that joke started us thinking about what we were doing with core postural alignment in a very different way, and actually, it transformed the way we currently speak about core postural alignment and how it works. So, is there such a thing as geofascia? Well, kind of. Let's talk about the external posterior fascial chain. Now, these things, they have different names depending on people. Sometimes they're called fascial trains. Tom Myers does that. Some people call them fascial.
The anatomy trains.
Yeah, anatomy trains. Yeah. Some people call them fascial meridians. We just refer to it as a fascial chain because it's a chain of interlinked fascia. And this one is the external posterior fascial chain. And that kind of implies that there might be an internal posterior fascial chain and also an external anterior fascial chain, and indeed an anterior interior fascial chain. But for tonight's this question, we'll just stick with the external posterior fascial chain. So this has the exterior posterior fascial chain. It connects the entire posterior surface of the body from the soles of the feet to the top of the head. It's split into two units. It goes from toes to knees and from knees to head, and that allows for the flexion of the knees. But when the knee's extended, as it is when we're standing, the external posterior fascial chain, it functions as one continuous chain of fascia. Now, the overall function of this external posterior fascial chain is to bring the body back into full extension. So let me try and explain briefly what that means. Okay. So the chain itself, it starts at the plantar surface of the toes and connects to the calcaneus via the plantar fascia and the short toe flexors. The calcaneus is joined to the condyles of the femur via the Achilles tendon and the gastrocnemius. The condyles of the femur, in turn, are connected to the ischial tuberosity via the hamstrings. Now, the ischial tuberosity is joined to the sacrum via the sacrotuberous ligament, and the sacrum is connected right the way up to the occipital ridge via the sacrolumbar fascia and the erector spinae. And the occipital ridge is joined to the frontal brow ridge via the galea aponeutica and also the fascia that's in the scalp. So all that is acting together to bring the body back into extension. Now, the primary curves of the body are actually flexion. Think of the fetal position. As we grow, oh, sorry, I'm just trying to get the next slide up here. As we grow, the external posterior fascial chain gradually pulls us into extension, producing the secondary curves in the body. The primary curves are more or less maintained by the shape of the surrounding bone. So at the occiput keeps the back of the skull going convex. The thoracic curve, that's maintained by the wedging of the thoracic vertebra and the attachments of the the ribs. The sacral primary curve, that's actually the shape of the sacrum. It bends convexly from behind, and even the heel is a primary curve. If you think about it, the shape of the calcaneus denotes the primary curve, this convex curve. But the secondary curves, however, they're more dependent on the balance of the muscles, first of all, to create them, and then to maintain them. So in the cervical region, for instance, as the infant lifts its head up, so the muscles change that convex curve of the primary curve into a concave one, using muscle tension. And then as the infant tries to stand, the lumbar lordosis is made by a similar process. And in fact, as they start standing and walking, so the secondary nerves, secondary curves, of the knee and the sole of the foot is also made. And so they're made by the action of the muscles. Now, when we've lost our primary alignment, the secondary curves lose their strength. And so we tend to fall into this primary curve, and gravity sags us forwards. Think of a picture of like a really old person bent over, for example. So what core postural alignment does is, by restoring the normal tension to this external posterior fascial chain, it brings the body back into extension and corrects the secondary curves and brings the primary and secondary curves into more of a balance. So in cases where there is lean, for instance, that's forward lean, very often there's a hyperextension of the knees. Now the secondary curve reverses then to a primary curve, and that puts extra compensatory strain on all the other secondary curves, and it throws the body into flexion. Now, this is too huge a subject to cover just in a question and answer call. We do go into this at length on our
Beyond the Plumb.
Beyond Plumb Mind. So it's the advanced course we teach after the practitioner training, and we look at these areas in much more depth. But it just gives you the idea of how deep and far-reaching CPA really is.
Yeah, I think what you can see here is from the diagram, really, with the fascial chain, is we're working in this sort of pelvic area particularly, and underneath, let's say the anterior hip, we're working underneath, let's say it was the right anterior hip, then we're going to have quite an impact on that posterior chain here, and particularly the sacrotuberous ligament. We do actually do quite a lot of work with that. A lot of our work is involved in influencing the position of that, so that changes the position of the sacrum. So core postural alignment on the surface seems quite simple, doesn't it? But actually, this sort of gives us an idea of the depth and how global it is. So if we're having this effect here underneath this right anterior hip, then we're changing the fascial chain all the way down the leg. It changes the balance of weight between the right and left feet. It affects the whole of the fascial chains posteriorly and therefore anteriorly, and also all the other sort of posterior chains that there are around the body. So it's fascinating, I think. And it's what happens is why geofascia is because it's subjected to the forces of gravity. So this is why we like this term geofascia, because the fascia has to respond to the forces of gravity, and we are helping the body to become rebalanced via the fascia, basically, to the forces of gravity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's great. So, see, from a silly joke, all this new understanding has derived.